All right, in this lecture, we're going to address attention. So we left off at the last lecture characterizing determinism and then looking at the case for why we live in a deterministic world. And not only why we live in a deterministic world, but why we want to live in a deterministic world. In the previous lecture, though, we looked at the case for free will and why, free will is a good thing. So today we're going to look at how well the two views, free will and determinism, do when put together. So, some philosophers argue that if determinism is true, then free will is impossible. And we're going to call this position incompatibilism, because it's basically the position that free will is incompatible with determinism. Well, if incompatibilism is true, then those finding both free will and determinism to be intuitively plausible have the problem of holding, well, incompatible beliefs. And as we saw in the previous past few lectures, there's really good cases to be made both for free will and for determinism. We want both to be true in a sense. Well, here's an important point in this lecture. When we're focusing on the relation between free will and determinism, in this lecture, we're not going to be addressing the questions, do we have free will or is determinism true? Even though we did look at those questions in the previous few lectures. Instead, what we're concerned with today is whether or not free will and determinism are compatible. That is, whether the following conjunction can be true: the free will thesis and determinism. Well, we'll call that conjunction compatibilism. It's the thesis that free will is compatible with determinism. And obviously, its opposite rival view is incompatibilism. Well, the intuition driving that a lot of people have is that free will and determinism, in fact, aren't compatible. And that then the conjunction on that previous slide is false. And this is due to a very important difference between free will and determinism. Well, according to the free will thesis, we are at least sometimes faced with alternative courses of action, each of which we can perform. Okay, so these alternative courses of action represent possible ways things could later be. Alternative possible futures given the actual past. Well, let's elaborate. Take Randy and his two cats. Well, Randy's trying to decide what to feed his cats. On the one hand, he could feed his cats Friskies. On the other hand, he could feed his cats Fancy Feast. So at T0 right now, it looks like there are two possible futures. One in which Randy feeds his cats Friskies, and the other in which he feeds his cats Fancy Feast. And we think, when we're deliberating about what to do, that the future is somehow open. And the future won't become definite until we, make a decision and act on that decision. But until we make that decision and act on it, there's several, at least two possible futures. But according to determinism, there is, at every moment, exactly one possible future given the actual past. Okay? And this difference seems to be a fundamental incompatibility between free will and determinism. So according to determinism, while Randy may think he has the choice between feeding his cats Friskies or Fancy Feast, in fact, there's just one possible future where the cats get Fancy Feast. So then that's just entailed by determinism. Given the past and the laws of nature, there's only one possible future. Well, this leads to what we'll call an argument for incompatibilism, an argument that incompatibilists give. And so basically, if determinism were true, then every event would be determined to occur exactly as it does by the past and the laws of nature. Well, since any action an agent performs is an event, it follows that any action by that agent would also be determined to occur exactly as it does by the past and the laws of nature. So, Randy's feeding his cats Fancy Feast, which is an event, is also determined to occur exactly as it does by the past and the laws of nature. Well then, according to the free will thesis, an agent performs an action freely only if, and that, recall, expressed as a necessary condition, only if the agent could do otherwise than perform the action. So given the assumption of determinism, the agent can do otherwise and perform the action? Well, only if the agent has control over the factors determining that action or event. In other words, only if at least some of the determining factors are up to the agent. Well, what are those determining factors? Well, it's the past and the laws of nature. So, if you can change the laws of nature, or you can change the past, then you have control over the future. There could be more than one possible future after all. So all Randy needs to do is change either the past or the laws of nature, and then Randy could actually have a choice between feeding his cats Friskies or Fancy Feast. But there's a problem. First, no one has control over the laws of nature, which are true independently of what humans may think or do. I'm sorry, but you can't change the laws of gravity. You may think you can, but if you go to the 7th floor of Beering Hall, where the philosophy department is located, and walk out to the roof and jump off, you're not going to be able to defy gravity. You're going to fall straight to the ground and probably die. That's just how it is. That's the laws of nature. We human beings discover the laws of nature. And we're continually refining our understanding of the laws of nature, but we don't change the laws of nature in any way. Alright, well, that leaves the past. We can't change the laws of nature. But there's a problem. We can't change the past either. Right now, no one now has control over events that have already happened. Nor could it ever be up to someone what happened before they were born. Okay? We cannot now change what already happened. The past is what is fixed. It's permanent. Okay? You can't change the past. It's frozen in time almost. Alright? So, and if that's right, then time travel to the past may not be possible. Or you could travel to the past, but you couldn't change the past. That's another complicated discussion. If I had another month, we'd actually have a lecture on time travel. There's a lot of cool, interesting philosophical issues related to time travel. But we don't have time. This is an intro class. So my suggestion to you is to take more philosophy classes where you can encounter the stuff on time travel. All right. Well, and as I said, this leads to an incompatibilist argument. So given that no agent has control of the factors determining what they do, these agents cannot do otherwise than what they do. And that's just to say that we aren't free. We have no free will. So the conclusion is that if determinism is true, well, we don't have free will. Well, let's look at a more precise formal argument. And it's a pretty complicated 8-premise argument. But I think you should understand the reasoning by now. Premise 1, determinism is true, and that's just an assumption. All right? Premise 2, so every event is determined by the past and the laws of nature. And that's just the definition of determinism, recall? And then premise 3, so S, which is a variable standing sum for a person, so a person S is doing X, some action, is determined by the past and the laws of nature. Premise 4, well, S could do otherwise than X only if S has control over the past or the laws of nature. But, and that's a typo, S doesn't have control over either the past or the laws of nature. So, S could not do otherwise than X, so S isn't free with respect to X. And since this argument applies to any agent in any action, that leads to the conclusion. If determinism is true, then the free will thesis is false. And that is the incompatibilist argument. So, I'm going to say right now that the tension between free will and determinism is serious. Very serious. For one, as we saw in other lectures, determinism is as plausible about the lawful nature of change in our universe, and it's an important component of our scientific worldview. Science presupposes determinism. We want nature to act in lawful, predictable ways. Recall, imagine if all water didn't just freeze, water didn't just become in a solid state when the temperature went below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but at any temperature whatsoever water could freeze. That would suck. Our bodies are like 90% water, so you could be, jogging down State Street in a hot summer day, and then you would freeze and probably die. We know. Medicine presupposes determinism. Meteorology, the study of weather, presupposes determinism. So a lot of science depends on it. But free will is equally plausible. It certainly seems to us that we perform many actions freely. And, worse, without free will, we couldn't be held morally responsible for any of our behavior. Which is okay for some things.
Hey, Will. I don't know a lot. You see this? All this shit. This is not your fault. Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
All right.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
So, like, if Robin Williams, in a role that in an Oscar-winning film, tells you it's not your fault, it probably has a certain therapeutic advantage, and that would be a case when you don't want people to be blamed. But there are cases where we want people to be morally responsible for stuff they do. For example, Bernie Madoff, who ripped off thousands, if not tens of thousands of people's life savings in a Ponzi scheme, while making billions of dollars himself. We want him to be held morally responsible for stuff like that. Okay? So that's a lot to give up. Well, what are we to do then? Since determinism and free will are incompatible, but both equally plausible. Well, many, if not most of us, would probably be inclined to suggest that giving up free will is giving up too much. The notion that most of our behavior is genuinely up to us, that alternatives to our actual behavior are within our power to perform, is just too central to our concept of persons as moral agents. So, instead, we should reject determinism and embrace indeterminism. Well, what does that mean? Well, indeterminism is simply the thesis that determinism is false. That's all it is. So determinism says, given the past and the laws of nature, there is only one possible future. Indeterminism says it is not the case that, given the past and the laws of nature, there is only one possible future. That's all indeterminism means. Well, the thesis of indeterminism does not, mind you, entail that every event, however, is undetermined by the past and laws of nature. Instead, indeterminism is simply the view that not every event is so determined. And there's a difference. Well, let me explain. Suppose there was just only one event in the history of our universe that was not determined by the past and laws of nature. Well, in that case, determinism would be false and indeterminism would be true. However, indeterminists, the type of indeterminism we're concerned with, wants to say that many more types of events aren't determined by the past and laws of nature. For example, free actions done by us human beings. So, well, are we within our rights to affirm indeterminism? Well, actually, yeah. Contemporary theorizing in quantum mechanics and various experiments actually offer evidence for why maybe we should reject determinism. There are occurrences in the universe, according to quantum mechanics, that, well, they're indeterministic, in the sense that the past and the laws of nature don't determine what happened, at least in the microscopic quantum domain. And in fact, according to some physicists and philosophers, an omniscient being like God, knowing all there is to know about the laws of nature and the prior conditions up to a certain moment, could not deduce what would happen after that moment. The evidence is complicated, but there's a number of experiments. There's an illustration of one below. So, notice though that if indeterminism is true, then given the laws of nature and the past history of the universe, In fact, there's more than one possible future, which is what we need, right? For free will, we need more than one possible future. So immediately prior to the occurrence of some undetermined event, there are no facts determining that that particular event will occur. In other words, there are at least two possible futures, one in which the event happens and the one in which the event does not happen. So Randy has two possible futures available to him after all, one in which he feeds his cats Friskies and one in which he feeds his cats Fancy Feast. Well, recall the issue of freedom and the incompatibilist argument. Anyone who accepts the free will thesis must conclude that any human behavior determined by the past and the laws of nature cannot be genuinely free behavior. The acts are not up to the agent because the agent could not have done otherwise than acting exactly that way. So, if we're going to find free acts then, we need to find events that are not completely determined by the past and the laws of nature. Hey, guess what? Indeterminism says there are such events. Woohoo! So, suppose then that your arm's rising during a lecture a moment ago was not determined by the past and the laws of nature. In that case, it is true that your arm could either rise or not rise. So, if indeterminism is true, it seems as if there are cases in which we perform actions and we could have done otherwise. That is, it seems that if indeterminism is true, then having free will is possible.